There is a threshold most people cross without ever realizing it. It arrives not with clarity, but with a sense of drift, days when hope feels thin and every effort lands flat. What you call stagnation is often just the slow upheaval before a new beginning, camouflaged as emptiness or defeat. You convince yourself you've been left behind, working tirelessly with nothing to show for it. Sometimes, being lost is the first proof you've begun to change. For a long time, you fight the world, hurling yourself against locked doors and dense walls. Relief seems possible only if the outside would finally shift, if circumstances transform to suit your vision. But the walls don't yield. Days become months, even years. Your losses pile up quietly, opportunities gone, relationships faded, the old momentum replaced by resignation. Somewhere in this exhaustion, the deeper pain emerges, not just that you're stuck, but that the world refuses to move for you, leaving you exposed and powerless. In Man's Search for Meaning, he surfaces this brutal crossroads. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. The sentence lands quickly, but the moment it describes can last a lifetime. You spend years burning energy, believing a new job, a new city, or another person's love will break the siege. But nothing outside responds, and the noise in your head only grows sharper until you start questioning your worth. Every plan you made collapses under the same silence. Every solution clangs against reality and falls useless. The pain is not just stagnation, but the realization you have run out of places to turn. And here is the twist too many miss. The world's refusal to change is an invitation, not only a threat. The deeper you reach for rescue in things you can't control, the more sharply you feel the ache of helplessness. The grip of meaning loosens. The philosopher closes the distance and steps in with a second blow. In the same book, he writes, "Life is never made unbearable by circumstances, but only by lack of meaning and purpose." It isn't the obstacle itself that breaks you. It's the vacancy left when the story loses shape, when every effort becomes a reflex, stripped of hope. You wake up, go through responsibilities, say the right words, but all of it feels like the shadow of real living. The deeper injury is psychological, the sudden suspicion that maybe nothing you do has real weight. In this state, even comfort turns sour. Security is just a more elegant prison. You see this in work. The ambitious friend who spent years mastering his craft, only to burn out and wonder what the point ever was. He changes jobs, coordinates new projects, and the applause feels distant. Promotions arrive, but meaning does not. In relationships too, the couple that has every advantage yet can't bridge the silent gulf growing between them. They solve logistics, fix routines, but that old connection doesn't return. More effort only stretches the ache. The pain here is double-edged, lost control and lost meaning. The first cut wounds the body, the second empties the soul. Here's something almost nobody tells you. Escaping this trap is not just about grit or discipline or even hope. The world does not bend for your desire to grow. Sometimes the only lever that moves is inside you. Flip it, and everything else follows. Ignore it, and nothing does. A strange kind of panic sets in when you realize that even if tomorrow everything went your way, you might still feel hollow. The external solution loses all power. Now comes the real complication. What if embracing your limits is not the beginning of defeat, but the first access to freedom? Let that possibility settle. The philosopher's words hover behind every disappointment, daring you to make meaning out of constraint rather than escape from it. But what stands in the way isn't ignorance or laziness. It's the habitual belief that meaning depends on victory, outward motion, or validation. You were raised on that equation. So when control evaporates, meaning threatens to vanish too. It's a crisis almost nobody around you notices, because by all appearances, you're just adapting. You're doing what you should. But the ache that remains is existential, not practical. Press this deeper. Why do we resist changing ourselves when every sign points internal? It's safer to believe the world is unfair rather than admit you might transform under the weight. The confronting truth. What terrifies us most is not the world's resistance, but the obligations of freedom when circumstances stop moving. Paradoxically, most turn away right here, opting instead for a quieter version of despair, a half-life of routines and half-measures. Meaning becomes an afterthought, a luxury, not the engine. Watch yourself for a moment. How much of what you call patience is just waiting for someone else to choose for you? There is a vulnerability in admitting you can't control what happens. But the deeper vulnerability is risking responsibility for your own response. Few psychological hurdles block this more than fear. Fear that your old stories just aren't enough. Fear that trying to change yourself will expose how little you know about who you are. Even attempts at optimism can become a prison here. You force yourself to see silver linings, but the sense of lack persists stubbornly beneath. Is it possible you're missing what the philosopher is urging you toward? Don't look away now. This is the place most blink and recoil, pretending the answer is still out there. What keeps many trapped is not the scale of the external problem, but the meaning vacuum left once external solutions dry up. Think about someone who kept fighting loss, heartbreak, or a reversal they couldn't control. It's not the blow that's fatal, but the erosion of the story that gave it coherence. Meaning doesn't need control to exist, just the courage to claim the response as your own. What vanishes if you can't make this turn? Years, identities, time that can't be redeemed. Friends and family don't notice the difference, but you do, in the small, dull ache at the root of every morning. Even victories turn hollow if the inside has gone dry. Sometimes, a setback strips away aimless striving, and underneath is only the raw ache of living itself. Will you let yourself feel that, or will you double down on the old demands? Without this inner change, every new effort ends up a repetition, not a renewal. Let's make it real. What belief are you carrying that keeps your efforts circling the same drain? Sometimes pain isn't a stop sign, it's a summons. Everything you've built out of hope hangs in the balance. If you're waiting for permission, you'll wait forever. Viktor Frankl believed that the human will cling to meaning even after everything else has been stripped away. That raw dawn pain, the place where names, jobs, futures dissolve. This was the territory he mapped, step by shattering step. He thought survival was never just about the body enduring, but about something even deeper, refusing oblivion. Most won't admit when the mask slips and the world forgets them, but he didn't look away there. He wrote from within it. Sometimes the world punishes persistence by simply refusing to answer, letting each day echo like a high-ceilinged room. Habits degrade into rituals, friends into shadows, and ambition into busy work with no finish line. But something underneath you will not die. There are lives that become invisible long before they end, exiled from the applause, clocking in invisibly and clocking out alone. You start to doubt there's any reason to go on. Secretly, you begin to suspect your days are only motion, busy signals with no reply, and it terrifies you. Then, the unthinkable creeps in. Not that you're lost, but that you're forgettable. The hardest exile isn't from circumstance, but from meaning itself. You don't miss the world, you miss yourself. And slowly, you become a master of endurance, turning numbness into ritual, always moving, never speaking the ache aloud. This is where the first radical crack appears, and nobody sees it coming. The world will not remember our daily struggle, the countless tiny victories just to get out of bed. But what happens when you decide apathy will not be your inheritance? The old frameworks dissolve, and you're forced to look for something indestructible amid the ruins. In Man's Search for Meaning, he put it plainly, our greatest freedom is the freedom to choose our attitude. Not your circumstances, your attitude. That is how you take back what forgetting tried to steal. Survivors of invisible battles know a story can be rewritten from inside the pain, not around it. When everything else is stolen, this is the one act the world can never revoke. The absence of an audience doesn't alter the gravity of your choice, it amplifies it. There's no applause, no rescue, only the sovereign act of choosing who you become in darkness. Sometimes you break and discover it was just the shell collapsing, not the soul inside. Here's the jolt. No one else can hand you this moment. The memorable line, the world forgets, but you get to decide if you disappear too. If you stand up again in this silence, it isn't for the world, it's for the meaning you refuse to lose. Will you risk feeling totally alone if it means living in radical truth for one day? Stubbornness, properly aimed, is a declaration. I am not finished, even if no one is watching. When nothing answers you back, each step forward is not proof of hope, but an act of raw authorship. Watch yourself try to justify retreat, and then notice what you do in spite of your arguments. Something in you outlasts the desert of disappearances if you let it speak. Remember, no recognition is coming. But does that mean nothing is at stake? The forgotten have all the evidence of defeat, except for the inconvenient pulse that refuses instruction. Some will offer comforting fictions and invite you quietly back into numb resignation. That is a door you can close with one unrepeatable gesture. Feel the flare of real loneliness as it burns away the wish for rescue, then keep moving anyway. No one can do this part for you. The choice is irrevocable, unseeable, but yours. Maybe the soul's most vital rebellion lives inside the person the world no longer sees. The shape of your next day will be built out of what lives through this, not what was lost to yesterday. There's a reason so much suffering lingers in the half-light, anonymous and unacknowledged. To live as if meaning is possible when no corroboration is coming might be the most subversive act of all. Don't let someone else's silence dictate the horizon of your spirit. You haven't failed if you're still questioning. There's nothing comfortable about bearing the weight of your own freedom. Nothing weak about refusing to surrender, even to invisibility itself. Look closer. The only condition with no escape is the one you never confront. If you miss this, the cost isn't measured in lost time, but in the slow leak of everything you could have become. But the thread running beneath despair has its own logic, and it is not finished unraveling yet. The unraveling brings the cold hour where expectation dies. No guarantee, no applause, just you, alone with the splintering shape of uncertainty. This is where the past attempts to drag you under again, whispering that meaning is an illusion and effort a fool's errand. But something can fracture, quietly, in that emptiness. The notion that worth must be proven externally, or that presence only counts if seen. We do not always choose the circumstances that exile us to the sidelines. Yet here, even abandonment can convert itself, through sheer endurance, into a form of willingness. The philosopher put it plainly in Man's Search for Meaning. In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. The world didn't suddenly recognize you. The door didn't swing open on its own. And still, inside the ache, something flickered, a possibility born out of refusal to succumb. For many, the instinct is to retreat, to stop reaching for a world that no longer answers back. Work becomes mechanical. Relationships thin to shadows, and the only constant is that familiar sense of being out of sync with everyone else's story. In the workplace, someone who feels forgotten might clock in and out unseen, their best efforts unnoticed, their potential unrealized. Yet, many keep returning, not for praise, but for the small insistence that their actions still matter to themselves. That insistence isn't some naive optimism, it's a radical type of agency. In relationships, the ache is sharper. Connections promise gone brittle. You watch friends drift, lovers lose interest, family grow silent, and the natural response is to believe you've disappeared altogether. But every day you risk reaching out. Every attempt to re-engage the living fabric of another soul is a rebellion against self-erasure. This willingness to try again is meaning in its rawest, most defenseless form. What is it that refuses to die when the outer world is silent? There is some interior engine, a stubborn spark that chaos cannot quite extinguish. The desperate need to know your existence ripples outward, however faintly, and the refusal to abandon this hope becomes its own statement. Attention spans are short, too short to witness the slow work of persistence, but persistence cares nothing for witnesses. It turns on itself, asks only, who do you become when no one is looking, no one is naming your pain? That is not a rhetorical question. It is an abyss that hangs open for years. History leaves us hundreds of examples of this paradox. Think of the artist whose work is recognized only after death, or the activist who spends decades in obscurity before the world catches up. Their impact is not in the moment of being seen, but in the days, years, and lifetimes spent laboring under the weight of feeling overlooked, unacknowledged, or actively dismissed. The point is not to romanticize suffering, but to show that meaning carves itself out in solitude, and the work of those who endure is not erased by lack of external validation. Now, here's where you might want to punch a wall. It could always get lonelier. The silence can become so thick you start believing it was never worth trying. Even hope can curdle into resentment of the world and eventually of yourself. To live through this, a brutal honesty is needed. There is no eventual audience coming, no final witness whose recognition redeems the long struggle. But inside that emptiness, a second possibility lurks. The meaning that arises when you act anyway, build, love, labor, mend, simply because you choose to, is immune to public erasure. The cold remains, but the internal axis slowly realigns. Before, despair said, you were powerless, finished, abandoned. Now, meaning says you are not beholden to that verdict. What keeps this engine running? Part of it is sheer defiance, the willingness to assert value without permission. In psychological terms, survival here depends on reframing abandonment as opportunity, a forced exodus from the script others write into an authorship that nobody can revoke. The process is agonizingly slow because it must be, requiring a total abandonment of the hope that the world will self-correct and come for you. Instead, you become the initiator, the one who acts not as response, but as originator. Watch closely. Here's the pivot. Your sense of possibility does not vanish, it mutates. It pivots from being dependent on circumstances to being forged in the refusal to yield. This loss-driven transformation isn't smooth. Grappling for meaning inside invisibility brings its own twisted temptations, cynicism, lethargy, the seduction of learned helplessness. Sometimes the mind clings to bitterness out of fear that letting go will invite a purer grief. But if you can withstand that logic, something unthinkable happens. The very weight that threatened to flatten your spirit instead clarifies it. You emerge as the sort of person whose meaning is not borrowed, but made, piece by silent piece. There will always be a counter voice. But why bother if nothing changes? That voice deserves respect. It is survival's guardian, the voice of battered wisdom. But meaning, in the depths, can bypass external circumstance altogether. It becomes a secret alignment, available only to the one who faces the void and stays upright anyway. That's the function of what the philosopher calls freedom. If you're still here, you're not done. Are you still listening, or have you ever actually gone silent? Don't trust the story that says endurance has no power. Sometimes, the very act of refusing to disappear is what burns through the old logic of erasure. You are present in ways the world cannot see, and your existence ripples further than its own silence understands. This thinker returns to that claim in Man's Search for Meaning. Forces beyond your control can take away everything you possess except one thing: your freedom to choose how you will respond. That is not a platitude. It is a razor. Cut away what you can't control. What's left is the domain that no abandonment, humiliation, or loss can confiscate. This domain, response, intention, persistence, becomes the seed of every future possibility. What if your resistance is the only evidence you'll ever get that your life was your own? The world may never send back a signal, but you shape your days anyway, returning again and again to build meaning out of what remains. The blank stares and silences do not contain your fate unless you surrender to their authority. Stepping into your authority is not a one-time declaration. It is reconstructed every day by choosing how you meet disappointment, isolation, or the interminable wait. Meaning is not a bright parade. Sometimes it is a silent tenacity that outlasts the amnesia of others, forging a purpose that is independent of all witnesses. Sometimes the very act of refusing to disappear is your profound resistance. Choosing how to respond shapes your life from the inside out. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and comment below. Are you embracing your own authority or letting silence define you?